Some people are really afraid of writing wills, giving instructions for wills. I've had many clients who's seen me and got really upset because by giving me instructions for a will, it means the end of their life, particularly if they haven't got family. But the way I see it is that it's an extension of organising your affairs, as you might organise your paperwork in your house. It's an extension of that. The same with a power of attorney. I know it's difficult to find, to think of someone who you trust when you haven't got children. But there are people out there that you can choose. So it's thinking about your will, thinking about your power of attorney. You might be having a conversation with a financial advisor, even if you don't think you've got a great deal of money, organising your pensions, maybe looking at insurances as well in some instances. So that's sort of preparing, if you like.
Welcome to The Full Stop, a podcast specifically for those that are childless not by choice, hosted by Berenice Howard-Smith, Sarah Lawrence and me, Michael Hughes. Our aim is to shed light on the many ways people arrive within the childless community and the issues specific to us. This episode, we broach the taboo topic of end-of-life planning. Please know this is a heavy episode, so go carefully. Also remember, the opinions expressed by our guests are theirs alone and not necessarily the view of The Full Stop. And we would also like to remind you that what you will hear today should not be taken as personal advice. It is general information only. And we strongly encourage you to seek your own independent advice for legal, financial and medical matters. Okay, now we've got that out of the way, let's get to know our guests and answer some of those difficult questions.
Let's start with introductions. So, Charlotte, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, so my name's Charlotte Dixon. I'm a wills and probate solicitor. I also produce powers of attorney. So a lot of my clients will be 60 years or over. I do have some younger clients, but I tend to work with the older clients. A lawyer for life as well. They used to be called solicitors for the elderly. Sort of lifetime lawyers now they call themselves. So yeah, I've got quite a bit of experience in terms of wills and powers of attorney and administrating probates as well, and working with the older generations and working through their issues and expectations and concerns and worries about that time of life as they get older.
Thank you, Charlotte. That's fascinating. You must see an awful lot of interesting things come through your door. We're going to come back to that in a bit. We'll circle back. Gail, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience? Welcome.
Sure. My name's Gail Leatherby. It's really nice to be here again with you. I'm a sociologist. Quite a long time ago, in the 90s, I did some research and wrote a PhD, which was focusing on the experience of people who defined themselves as either infertile and or involuntarily childless. And although I've done research on quite a number of things across the years, a big area of my work has been looking at the status and experience of people who do and people who don't parent, and the significances in terms of similarities and differences between those groups. So as well as doing research with people who haven't got children, I've done research with people who have children through a variety of means. And I've looked at stigma and stereotype and various issues across that. I did write a paper from my PhD, it was published in the early 2000s, where I talked about age and ageing, and I was really lucky in that my respondent group was from sort of early 30s to mid, and some of the things that my respondents in their 60s and 70s were talking about is interesting for me to revisit now as because I'm in my 60s now. So I'm finding it quite interesting to revisit some of those things, the things that people said to me. Just, sorry, I'm going on a bit, but just one thing that I think is really relevant to our discussion and the question that Penny asked earlier is that I'm also very interested in the notion, the concept of social death, and the fact that, and that can happen at any age. I think it's probably more likely to happen as we get older, but can happen at any age when we feel as if we're being ignored by society and people within it. And for example, some people talk about that happening when they become widowed, because then they're left out of some circles that they were not in before. And I think that is the issue of social death is relevant to our discussion of childlessness, I think.
I'd love to explore that more, Gail. I think you're absolutely right. And that's kind of social death, I think, just by not having children. You have that kind of grief where you're excluded because of not having children. And another kind of grief because actually if you're on your own, and if you haven't been on your own, then that's a whole nother kind of thing you have to also deal with, I think, as well.
Absolutely.
So definitely, let's go back and circle back to that as well. I think that's important. And Penny, welcome to the Full Stop. Could you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Hello, my name's Penny Shepherd. I live in East Kent, on the south coast of England, UK. I'm childless, but frankly, being childless doesn't really define me anymore. I define myself as much more about aging without children, because even if I'd had children, they could have moved to the other side of the world, or we could be estranged, or whatever. Concerns me is the process of aging without access to informal care and family support, because I don't have a wider family either. When my partner dies, and when my cousin who's 9 years older than me dies, and my only other cousin who's 14 years older than me and may be dead already, then my nearest relative is that cousin's children, who I have never met. And I'm increasingly in a typical situation. So I can't remember how, but about 4 years ago, I got involved with a small UK charity called Aging Without Children. And I set up our independent East Kent local group with someone else. So I'm the coordinator of Aging Without Children East Kent. And more recently, I became a trustee of the Aging Without Children charity. But as part of that process, I mean, what we do, and sorry to go on a while, what we do in our Aging Without Children East Kent meetings is three things. First of all, we just get together and realise we're not the only one in the world. And what people say consistently is never mind anything else. It's so nice to be in a space where people aren't banging on about their grandchildren and their wonderful daughter and so on and so forth. So we're all the same. Some of us have had children, but none of us have got care and support and regular contact with children. Secondly, we get access to the information we need, which is often missing from advanced care planning materials and after death materials. So much material starts, first have a conversation with someone you trust. And then when you go, I haven't got one of those, there is no answer. You know, all of the material, including all the material from the UK's Office of the Public Guardian, starts with an assumption that you have someone you trust. And thirdly, we try and influence the agenda so that people who are aging without children can thrive in later life. So, for example, we're working with our local acute hospital, and someone in the hospital has interviewed some of us about our experience of being alone in hospital, and then packaged that material into a very short training course, which he's delivered to about 300 hospital staff. And the presentation is called, the same relatively small set of issues keep coming up, but the presentation is called Nobody Cares and Nobody Advocates for You. And so his aim is to change that.
That's incredibly important. Thank you,
Yeah.
Paul.
The other thing that's probably worth saying before I finish is that I was a carer for my mother, who is now dead, but I was a carer for her for the last 10 years of her life. And so many of us who are involved in AWOC started out like that. We became the carer, not least because we were the ones without next generation family to care for. And as a result of that, we discovered the degree to which the UK health and social care system assumes that there is someone like us, not particularly to, kind of do the physical care, but to do the project management and the advocacy. And I had a light bulb moment, much like Kirsty Woodard, the founder of AWOC, which is, wait a minute, when I get to the stage that my mother gets to, and we've got an awful lot of dementia among the women in our family, so I have no faith that I will die without dementia. When I get to that stage, I won't have a penny. What will I do? And now I'm a carer for my partner, who's 16 years older than me and who has dementia and umpteen other health problems. And it's the same. I say to people, I'm an unpaid NHS project manager, just joining up all the bits of his care, organising his social care, managing his life. And it's a problem because I won't have a penny. And so what I've been doing over the last couple of years is really researching what planning for later life without someone you trust, and then what after death without someone you trust looks like, and what's the information that we need to be, where's the missing manual? What should the missing manual say? And I'll talk further later about what I found out.
Thank you so much, Penny. That is brilliant. And thank you all of you for your introduction. I was just having a little chat with our audience, because we have an audience who you don't see, but they're actually adding some questions in here, and so much empathy with what all of you are saying, and about that idea of kind of actually just not having anyone to advocate for you. So someone in our audience has said, I so relate to Penny's point about not having anyone obvious to turn to as an advocate. And again, Penny, you and I have spoken about this a bit in our previous chat, that I absolutely see that too. My husband is older than me, and not having anyone there. And again, that's another person in our audience has said that too. And somebody else has said that they worry about what the future and what it will mean for them, because they haven't got children, currently aged 42, but starting to think about that and what that future looks like. And I just kind of want to pick up, I think, on...
Berenice, can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
Which is the disclaimer. I mean, I've done a lot of research now. I'm an information squirrel, and I have opinions, but I am not a lawyer. And I'm not a solicitor, and some of my opinions probably differ from Charlotte's views and from the sort of perceived wisdom among the solicitor community. So take everything I say with a large pinch of salt. Do your own research. Mm-hmm. This is not personal advice, and of course anything Charlotte says won't be personal advice either. Do your own research, make your own decisions. Right. Standard disclaimer. Don't sue me.
No, that is absolutely fine. Not the full stop either. We have our disclaimers anyway, so that's fine. I think two things that kind of got to me was conversations that I'd had with other people, or things I'd been to where there wasn't really that kind of got to the nitty gritty of it all. And I know that Gail and I had spoken about this too. And I thought there's a conversation here with what Gail's working on, and also with what Penny is working on, and bringing that together in one space, but also being brave enough to say, look, it's inevitable, is it? We all die. I mean, at the end of the day, death is going to happen to us. It's increasingly on my mind, and I think that the conversations that I've had independently with Gail and with Penny and at the webinar, I think are really, really important ones to have. And I also love that we have Charlotte here too, but it was that bravery in going, okay, this is going to happen. And I think the straightforwardness of it, Penny, I know you put the disclaimer in about that, but I think the fact that you were just like, right, this is going to happen, and now we need to deal with this, and here's some stuff that I have done, and it looks like this. And I thought that was just incredibly powerful, and because it was one of the first times that I've been to something where that has been spoken about so openly, and I felt it just needed sharing. So in a long answer, sorry, Michael, that was a very long answer to quite a short question.
That's what we're here to talk about.
That's what we're here to talk about. So I would like to, where do we want to start with this? Should we at the beginning, before we started recording, we were talking about kind of actually the process of let's start with death and then work backwards. I don't know, is that comfortable? Is that a good place for us to start with this conversation today? What do we need to do to die, I don't say the word responsibly, but to die knowing that we are die well? Is that a thing? I don't know if that's the right word I'm using here.
From my point of view, you could, in terms of, perhaps dying well, you've organised yourself. Some people are really afraid of writing wills, giving instructions for wills. I've had many clients who's seen me and got really upset because by giving me instructions for a will, it means the end of their life, particularly if they haven't got family. But the way I see it is that it's an extension of organising your affairs, as you might organise, your paperwork in your house. It's an extension of that. The same with a power of attorney. I know it's difficult to think of someone who you trust when you haven't got children, but there are people out there that you can choose. So it's thinking about your will, thinking about your power of attorney. You might be having a conversation with a financial advisor, even if you don't think you've got a great deal of money, organising your pensions, maybe looking at insurances as well in some instances. So that's sort of preparing, if you like.
Yeah, so something when you say about kind of talking to people about power of attorney, I'm thinking that with the person who's asked the question in our chat, currently age 42, I know that when I was 42, I had a certain number of people in my life that were there, but now that I'm older, my power of attorney might then change. Confession, do not have set power of attorney set up. I'm still thinking about what that would be. I'm struggling with that a bit for the same reasons I think of, like, well, who am I going to point to that? But is it okay to kind of make changes to those things? What might be at 42 might change, say, at, 52, 62, 72. We may change those things. And so is that a fluid process, or does it have to be one and done? Just from a purely practical point of view.
Yeah, with a power of attorney, I would say if you're thinking about doing that in your 40s, and absolutely the people you think about then, who you would then trust maybe later in your 60s, could change. I would say, anyone can do powers of attorney themselves if they want to, so you don't have to go and see a solicitor to do them. But I would say don't then register them with the Office of the Public Guardian here in the UK, because you have to pay a fee for that. Whereas if you were to do the powers of attorney yourself, there's no fee to pay if you're doing it yourself. And if you think you may well change those people that you've chosen, then you've got a document there which is ready to be registered if need be, but you can change it again in the future if you wish. If you have got a power of attorney in place that you have then registered with the Office of the Public Guardian and you want to change it, you've got to start the whole process again. So you can't amend a power of attorney that's already been registered with the Office of the Public Guardian here in the UK.
Thank you. I didn't know that. That is practical advice. It's kind of, and obviously bearing in mind, just keeping in touch that our audience is global, so we're aware of that too. So this may be different, another disclaimer. It may be different wherever you live, even in Scotland, Wales, it could all be different. So check your locality. It might not be applicable to your country. I think it's really
when I say the UK, technically our jurisdiction is England and Wales, so well be different in Scotland. It's similar in Scotland, but it may well be different, and of course is likely to be different around the world.
So now, of course, we're talking about before death, and indeed the webinar that I ran that Berenice was on was called After Death Without Someone You Trust. But I ran an earlier webinar, which is recorded and is on YouTube, and I'll add the link to your resources, but called Planning for Later Life Without Someone You Trust. And actually, so much of the discussion about planning for later life, it tends to leap straight into writing a power of attorney. And from where I sit, that's not actually the most important thing. Like I say, I'm a heretic. And to me, the most important thing is to actually write down your wishes and preferences and views, even if you want a friend who knows you well to be your power of attorney. So I would say start with what's called your advance statement, which is not legally binding, but that people will take into account. And also consider whether you want to do an advance decision to refuse treatment. Because actually, if you don't have a power of attorney and you lose capacity without a power of attorney, then basically a social worker or someone will go to the Court of Protection and get appointed what is called a deputy, which is, broadly speaking, and Charlotte will tell you the exceptions, broadly speaking, the same as a deputy, but under more rigorous oversight from the Office of the Public Guardian. And there is a problem with the waiting time for the Court of Protection to do that, and it is a more expensive alternative than having a power of attorney. But on the other hand, it gives more oversight over the person who is appointed. And if you don't have a wide family or friends you really trust, actually that greater degree of oversight can be worth the money. And if you have very little resources at all and you lose capacity, then your local authority will probably be willing to be your deputy, although they will still charge what resources you have for it. But generally speaking, in conventional financial planning material, all it tends to say about deputies is, write a power of attorney, because if you don't have one and you lose capacity, your loved ones will be obliged to go to the Court of Protection and they'll have to become deputies, and becoming a deputy is so much more onerous than being an attorney, which is true. And then they don't tell you any more about being a deputy, and they don't tell you the advantages of having a deputy as well as the disadvantages. So all is not lost if you don't have a power of attorney, although there is a waiting time problem at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, go on.
One thing I just wanted to say, though, about deputyships, again, in England and Wales, is that it's very, very difficult to get one to cover health and welfare because the scenarios are so unique. It's very, very difficult. It's much easier to get a deputyship to cover someone's financial affairs.
Yes.
But it is significantly more expensive than putting in place a power of attorney. And it does take a long time because it's an application to the court. And, yes, you can get the local authority to act for you as a deputy, but do they know you very well? Possibly not. So I can see why it's important that people should write down their wishes and then make sure as many people as possible know what those wishes are, including their GP. So I would always say, in terms of a health and care power of attorney, make sure your GP has a copy. If you're looking to write things down in the form of an advanced statement or advanced decision, again, make sure your GP at least has a copy.
Yeah,
Lovely.
absolutely.
Thank you both very much.
All I would say about a health and welfare attorney is that personally, I deliberately don't have one because I don't have anyone who knows me to do that. And therefore, I would rather rely on professional best interest decision making. And the webinar talks about that and about, what you can look at to understand what that means. I would actually rather rely on that than somebody who doesn't know me at all making decisions about my health and welfare on my behalf.
And
so
that's fine.
And that's a debate. Yeah.
It's making that informed decision that's right for you.
Absolutely. But the challenge is, in terms of information, is that so much information is designed for the person with family support that the pros and cons of what you should do as someone who hasn't got that tend not to get aired. And that's the gap that I'm trying to help fill.
It sounds to me that in talking and listening to you both, Gail, it reflects very much what you'd said about the concept of social death, and that there's this society and cultural narrative that contribute to that erasure of childless adults at that end of life discussion. Is that what you found in your research?
Yeah, and as I've been listening, I've also been thinking about the issue of legacy, and that actually that I think that is something that becomes more significant to all of us as we get older, but to people without children, it takes on a different dimension. And certainly from my research, I remember some quite young people talking about the fact that they felt that there would be no legacy of their life, that their life would essentially have been meaningless. So, of course, there's the term no genetic legacy, as it were, but it means something so much more significant to individuals themselves. But I think that that's kind of really interesting too, in terms of certainly, all of the really wonderful avenues that are opening up now for people to talk about their experiences of growing older as childless, and people talking about some of the things for which they might be remembered, and remembered by whom and in what ways. And of course, when I did my research, my initial research all those years ago, there was not the internet in the way there is now. Even the issue of a digital legacy is maybe something that many people are thinking about now that they wouldn't have thought about in the past, and that it puts a completely different slant on it. The other thing that I think that I've written a little bit about and I'm interested in too is the issue of, for want of a better word, stuff. What happens to your stuff when you don't have any children to leave your stuff to? Who will want your stuff? And I mean, I live on my own, and I live in a quite big flat, and it's pretty full of things that were my mum and dad's, things that were my late husband's, as well as my things that mean something to me but will mean nothing to anybody else in the future. And there is an anticipated grief, I think, around the no one will want my stuff, if that makes sense. So I think all of that is relevant too. But yeah, I slightly went off the point, Berenice. I think that the social death idea is almost like that you don't fit in certain spaces because of your identity. And as I've said, I think that can happen at any age for anybody for all sorts of reasons, but that it becomes probably more and more significant as we get older, and has a specific dimension for people who haven't got children, I think. Because, of course, there's the, slightly off our point, but there is I think Penny said earlier, how great it was to be in a space where everybody wasn't talking about their grandchildren. Well, one of the things in my research I argued very much from looking at people across the life course is that our feelings about our identity ebb and flow and change across the life course. And when our friends are having children and when our friends are having grandchildren, they're two pivotal points. And I think probably another one is when our friends are dying.
Yeah, that's true. It brings in a kind of element of we say it happens to us all, but actually there's a fragility there. And I think when we see other people passing away, and I would imagine, Gail, also perhaps how those families then, if they have a family, if they have a family around them, that experience of death can perhaps parallel to our own and bring up all sorts of different feelings around grief. It's a very complicated grief, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Penny, hi.
Yeah, no, picking up on what Gail said about stuff. Stuff is a real issue. Although stuff isn't only an issue if you're childless. When I cleared my mother's flat, I threw away the table decorations from her wedding. At the point I was doing it, her wedding was had been about 65 years earlier. And I didn't want those. They had no meaning for me. So don't underestimate the amount of stuff that actually, if you've got descendants, they don't necessarily want. But it's an issue. And indeed, it's something we're looking at in AWOC East Kent at the moment, sort of talking to the house clearance companies and understanding a bit more about what they do, thinking about decluttering. You could sum up some of the problems is what do you do with the heirlooms when there aren't any heirs?
Yeah.
And So, for example, one thing I did, which I think is interesting, and I think I wouldn't have done if I'd been childless, was that my great-grandfather was on the Titanic. He survived, but he was also in the Navy, and he had a collection of naval medals that my grandmother kept in a drawer, my mother kept in a drawer, and I found in the drawer when I was clearing my mother's flat. And a few years ago, I sold them at auction, at a specialist Titanic auction, not because I needed the money, but because I was afraid that if I put them in a drawer, and so I took photos of them and I sold them with their provenance, i.e. with the fact that they were his medals. And the reason I did it was that I was terrified that one day a house clearance company would come in and chuck them in the bin with no sense of knowing what they were. And this way, they've gone to someone who knows their history and who actually wants them. And I think as a person without family, you have to think through that sort of thing. What are the things that you can find a good home for now? And what are the things that you might have to sort of work with your own psychology to let go of now, so that you're clearing the decks for when you need to downsize, possibly go into a care home and so on.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Sorry.
Shannon, is that something that you can do in terms of legalities? I was going to ask you.
To
answer that question.
Because I'm very much involved in administrating people's estates, and there are a lot of people's estates I administer where they haven't had children. And so I work very closely with local auctioneers initially. I ask them to come in and value the items. I ask them what they might be able to sell. Sometimes specific items are bequeathed to charities or local historical societies if they've got some local, historical value. So as a solicitor dealing with probates, there is a very careful process that is gone through. And to me, it makes no difference whether someone's got children or not. Usually with children, items are bequeathed and they usually pass down to the children. But there are a lot of children out there who don't want their parents' items, or certainly not all of them. So it's a very similar process. And as I say, it's, from my point of view, it's carefully done. Things are identified, valued, grouped, and, sold if they can at specialist auctions, or as I say, given to charities or local historical societies before they're then, ultimately, sometimes they might go with a house clearance, they might have their own shop and items can go in there. And then ultimately, there is going to be a pile that sadly goes to the tip.
But I think part of it is the recording of the provenance. If there's family, they know what the additional value is of things is over and above what an auctioneer can come in and physically see. And that information may or may not manage to be retained. I think that's the challenge for AWOCs. I mean, the other challenge, I think, Charlotte, is that I think, you are probably typical among solicitors in doing that, but there's very little information out there about what you do. And the absence of information is kind of what amplifies the fear, because you don't know kind of quite what's going to happen, and so you fear the worst. And also sometimes, the house isn't cleared on death. The house is cleared on, you go into the care home. And the house needs to be cleared and sold PDQ, that sort of thing.
If the topics in this episode chime with you, you can get in touch with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn and Blue Sky. And we love your feedback. Childless Not by Choice listeners can carry on the conversation with us in our safe place at the Full Stop online community. For more details on how to join and to claim a free month trial on us, please visit www.thefullstoppod.com. We'd like to give a huge thank you to the current members of our awesome online community, because it's down to them that we can keep the lights on for the podcast and look forward to giving back to the childless community as we grow.
We've had to clear my parents' house because they've both gone into a care home. And I think I'm only starting. So I think I've got a good grasp of what has to happen, what goes on, only because I'm in the thick of it. When I was 10 years ago, I had no compulsion to understand what solicitors were doing, what financial advisors were doing, because it didn't really mean anything to me. It's not until you actually get in the thick of it that you're hungry for information. But so it's listening to this conversation is actually quite interesting because I'm actually in it right now. And one of the things I'd like to take us back to is what is I know what a power of attorney is, but there's going to be some of our audience that won't know what a power of attorney is. So, Charlotte, if you could just give us a brief explanation of what a power of attorney is.
Yeah, sure. So it's a legal document whereby you, in England and Wales, you're called the donor because you're giving the power. So it's a legal document that you can create to appoint 1, 2, 3, 4 people as your attorneys. So they're your legal representatives to represent you, speak for you and manage your finances and your property. And then there's a separate document where, again, you can appoint the same people or different people who can speak for you in terms of your health and your care.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
So they're then legally recognised documents.
Okay. Yeah, so some people can get some practical advice. In Australia, we have a power of attorney, but we also have enduring guardianship, which is that health document where you can stipulate this person has the right to, the way I explain it, and this is going to sound horrible, but you have the right to turn the machine off if you have to, that sort of thing.
Ultimately, yeah.
Yeah. But one of the other things that was, when we went through this process, what was really interesting was about having a power of attorney. If you have a number of attorneys, do you assign that each single person can make a decision on their own, or do you have to make a group decision? Is that, or there has to be some sort of collaboration? Is that something that you would see in the UK?
You can appoint people in different ways. So you could just appoint one attorney initially. So if you had a partner, you could appoint that partner initially, and then you'd have replacement attorneys who could be very close friends, relatives, very good neighbours can often be appointed. In terms of finances, you can appoint a financial advisor or your solicitor. Solicitors don't tend to be appointed as health and care attorneys, but you can also appoint attorneys what's called jointly and severally, so they can make decisions together, or say if one of them's away on holiday or something, one can make a decision for them, alone, as it were. So you have this joint and several option as well.
Yeah.
One thing worth adding about a health and welfare power of attorney, in the light of Michael's comment, is that in the UK, on the form that the donor fills in for a health and welfare power of attorney, there is a tick box which says, do you consent or do you not consent to this person making decisions about, I think the phrase is life-limiting illnesses. So you can either tick they have the power to turn off the machines box, or you can not tick it and say that they have a right to make your decisions on your health and welfare, excluding that final, sort of end of life decision. And I certainly know some solicitors that are willing to be a health and welfare attorney, but only if that life-ending decisions box is not ticked. So they won't take responsibility for that final decision, but they will take health and welfare responsibility up till then.
Oh, thanks. Gail, I've got a question for you. In your research, was there anything that stood out about? A really good example is there are two very different people, my mum and I. So my mum doesn't want a funeral. She wants to be buried in a cardboard box, and that's her choice. Whereas I'm thinking, That's really, I know that's her choice, but my choice would be, for me, is no, I want someone to celebrate my life. I want people who knew me to say, good to know you, see you later. I've got ideas about actually doing a video for the service, but that's another story. But in your research, was there anything about the differences in how people see that end?
Well, to be honest, no, I didn't talk about that with them. But I mean, it is interesting. I have for the last few years, I've been doing voluntary work with let's call it a listening service, and it is interesting that there are some discussions there around end of life and how life might end. And also, interestingly, in terms of my own life course, I'm having this discussion with other people that I know who are making similar and different choices to you and your mum, Michael. So I have friends who are beginning to talk about what they want for their funeral, but also friends who don't want to talk about it at all and don't want to even think about it, whether or not they have children. Again, that doesn't, to me, that those discussions don't seem to be linked to childlessness or not. It's their discussions that people find difficult. But having said that, what I think is really interesting, and this does come from my research, I would say that people say still that death is the last taboo, but actually there's quite a lot more discussion around death than there used to be. And I still think that the discussion around childlessness as a whole seems to be the last taboo, and those two things come together in the discussion that we're having. So the fact that there is, as Penny is pointing out really eloquently, there is there's an assumption that there is someone there that you trust at the end of your life, because you will have children and or close kin, and that so many of us haven't got that, and the numbers are increasing. So it seems to me this is a really interesting point where the two conversations kind of dovetail, really, the childlessness discussion and the death discussion. And I think there's an awful lot more to be done on that. And there's an awful lot of research. And your example, Michael, I think that's a project that needs to happen, talking to people about what is it that they want for their end of life, but their afterlife, as it were, the aftermath of their death. I think we need to have that discussion amongst researchers, and I don't think there's enough of that happening. I would say one thing, and this sounds like a bit of a curveball, but I don't think it is. We need to talk about animals too. Animals are really significant. Now, I kind of want to preface it with the research or the missives that suggests that older people are more lonely than younger people is a stereotype. And actually quite a lot of research suggests now that loneliness isn't linked to age at all. It's linked to all sorts of other issues, and actually socioeconomic issues are the most significant in terms of loneliness. So again, people without children aren't necessarily more lonely than people without children. So there's all that challenging that. But having said that, again, I also know this from my voluntary experience, animals keep people alive. So when there is no one else in someone's life, the fact that they have an animal is really, really important. And animals are also something that people towards the end of life worry about. Who's going to look after my cat when I'm gone and all that? Mm-hmm. And there are charities, for example, that lots of people don't know about, that you can get in touch with to say, will you take my cat? Will you take my dog? And not put them down, but give them a happy life for the rest of their lives. So the idea of animal kin is really important too in this kind of discussion, I think, for lots of older people, and also for people who are isolated in any kind of way. But I guess particularly for the childless, you think, well, who would take Bruno or Fred or whoever? There are people out there who will do that. So yeah, I didn't answer your question, but I think it's a really
right
point in terms of we need to know more. We need to know more about what everybody wants again, what everybody
It's
wants.
actually funny.
Like a database or something like that. Something needs to change.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because, Gail, because you're in Cornwall, my brother-in-law is Cornish, but that's besides the point. But when we have a discussion, when we have a family discussion, when my mum was still at home, that myself, Vicky, my wife, and my sister, we would sit around and we would Mum would tell us this is what I want, and we've known for a long time because she was very open about this is what I want. So we're very clear. Yeah. But he just could not be part of that conversation. He would have to walk off because it's like with his fingers in his ears going, la, 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 I can't listen to this.
Yeah.
And it just emphasises the point that you made about that we need to be able to talk about this. Otherwise, how will people know?
And there's other things we need to find out. So my father died long time ago. My father died when I was 20 and I'm an only child. And my father is buried in a very beautiful graveyard in Coverack, which is the bottom end of Cornwall. And my mum always said that she wanted to be buried with my dad. She wanted to be buried with my dad. And so when my mum died, about my mum died 12, 14 years ago now, I talked to the funeral director and I said, my mum wants to be buried in the same grave as my father. And the funeral director pulled a face and said, and I said, what's the matter? And he said, well, the thing is, people have to be buried at a particular depth for another body to be buried on top. And most people don't know that. And he said, I'll go and talk to the grave digger. And my maiden name was Thornton. And the funeral director went to talk to the grave digger. And he said, Mrs. Thornton wants to be buried with her husband. And the grave digger said, if my dad buried Mr. Thornton, we'll be fine because he'll have buried him deep enough. Anyway, his dad had buried my dad, so we were fine. But I mean, who knows? Who would know that actually, if you want to be buried with someone, you have to say when the first person is buried that they're buried at a particular depth. So there's all sorts of things that we just don't know that it would be really useful.
I always say to clients, if there's something that's really important to you about your body being buried or your ashes being interred in a certain place or scattered in a certain place, if it's really important to you, your pet's ashes interred with you or scattered with you, you must tell someone about it. You must write it down. And what you can do if you write a will with a solicitor, those instructions then can be placed with the will and kept with them, and then they're read at the appropriate time. But it absolutely, if there's something that's important to you, you have to tell as many people as possible, whether it's your solicitor, your financial advisor, your accountant who you might have worked with all your life, a neighbour, a friend. If there's something important, let people know.
But also, if you don't have an ongoing relationship with a particular solicitor, for example, the most important piece of information to hang on to and make sure people know about is actually who your executor is, because you can have all this information recorded with your will, but if you die alone, there is currently absolutely no guarantee that your will be found. It hopefully will, but there is no legal obligation on anyone to find out who your executor is and to find your will.
We certainly had this experience that I've had in my family with somebody who actually we thought there wasn't one, and so we did the best we could, and then it was much, much later because they were a little bit of an outlier and we just didn't know enough about them. And that was quite hard, to then go back and live with that and go, I didn't do what they wanted is also quite tough. Yeah.
But you existed, Berenice. If someone dies alone and the local authority is responsible for want of a better phrase, disposing of the body because there isn't anyone else.
Yeah, good point.
There is no legal requirement to do anything for the local authority to do anything other than try to work out if you had an objection to cremation.
Yeah.
Beyond that, there is good practice and there is a financial interest in finding out if you had any money to pay for the funeral. But beyond that, even the guidance on local authority funerals talks about it being good practice to provide to find next of kin. It doesn't actually say it's good practice to try and find out if there's a will and an executor,
Good point.
which is a bit crazy. And indeed, it's so crazy that in the UK later this year, it's something that the Royal Commission is going to be looking at.
Yeah. Become a commodity, don't we? Charlotte, I have a question for you, and we're going to start to bring the podcast to a close at that point. We could go on for ages, I think. This is so fascinating. But there's a question. Has anyone expressed reservations around taking on power of attorney in the light of possible assisted dying legislation coming in England and Wales? And before you answer, to preface, we're recording this in February 6, and it's somewhere in government being debated at various points and keeps coming back. So it's not actually at this point of recording a law in this country.
Yeah, there's nothing you can put down in a health and care power of attorney that would go against the current laws of England and Wales. Sometimes people in the past have tried to put certain instructions or preferences in, and when it goes to the Office of the Public Guardian to be registered, those paragraphs are struck out. So they might still register the power of attorney, but they'll strike out those preferences or instructions that go against the laws. So there's nothing anyone can be asked to do that goes against what the law currently says.
Lovely. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Thank you for answering that. And then just lastly, just from the comments, lots of thanks, Penny, for your information that you've been sharing as well. And Gail, an awful lot here around pets. I think that's landed a lot. I know just that the Cinnamon Trust and the Dogs Trust have I have the canine card for my dog, and I've volunteered with the Cinnamon Trust, and I know they're based in Cornwall, aren't they, in Hale?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I went past and went, you're amazing, because I volunteered for them as a walker. So actually, another way of actually other people being involved to help other people in situations is to actually volunteer as well. And that also sort of passes it on a bit. But they're two I know of at the moment.
Yeah, Cats Protection have a scheme for cats as well.
Of course they do, yeah. And I think maybe the Blue Cross might do as well. I know one of our audience members is a volunteer and does do a lot around cat welfare as well.
That's it. And it's not just about giving your pets your animal companions a home after your death, is it? It's about supporting you. If, for example, you can't no longer take your dog for a walk, someone will come and take your dog for a walk.
Yeah, the Cinnamon Trust do that brilliantly. They did it for my grandmother, who we just weren't available to do what we needed to do, and they were helped when we had needed that extra support. But yeah, we were present to do that as well. So one last question for each of you, and that is that if there was something that you could change, a reform or something else that you could change to make it easier for people who are childless, not by choice, at this time of their life, what would that be? If you had a wish list, what would that be? What would be on it? What would be the one change you'd like to see?
More of this, more discussion, more openness about death talk.
Yeah, that sounds, the more we talk about it, the less it is. I loved your point, Gail, about that intersectionality of the fact that people don't want to talk about childlessness and they don't want to talk about death. And here we are, the two big taboos coming together and saying that this is a thing. Yeah, I think that's very, very appropriate. Yeah, it sounds like this is a powerful conversation to have. More of it, for sure, yeah.
I started my research, I think Michael know, I started my research with a project on miscarriage, and I talked then about how people metaphorically and physically cross the road, not wanting to talk about, and I think death talk, there's more death talk now, as I've said, but still not enough.
Yeah. Penny, what changes would you like to see? But there's probably quite a lot, isn't there?
It is quite a lot, and that one is really difficult. I mean, the one that we can all influence is better information, because one of the problems is that there isn't enough information out there for us about that's relevant to our circumstances. And that's a gap that AWOC is trying to fill, but it's also a gap that professionals and other organisations should be trying to fill as well. But the two legal changes that I would particularly like to see is that one is that the Law Commission have recommended some updating of the Wills Act, and I would like the government to take up their recommendations and implement them, so to pass a new Wills Act. And one of the benefits of that would be that it would enable electronic wills. And once you've got an electronic will, then you can put in place the sort of thing that we've automatically got for powers of attorney, like there's a central register, maintained by a government department as to whether or not a will exists. And it's crazy that we don't have a central government record of that. So the whole stuff around power of attorney is much more up to date than the situation around wills. So the will situation needs to be modernised. And the final thing, which sounds really obscure, is the law and guidance on local authority funerals, because that is something that is particularly relevant for those of us that don't have families. I think some of us will have nieces and nephews and so on. And actually, in some ways, that's as good, depending on how close you are to them, that's as good as having children for sort of organising your end of life. But for those of us who have no one, and where the local authority is likely to need to play a role, at least in terms of finding out who the person is that will take responsibility, then the legal framework and the guidance is woefully inadequate at the moment. And if they did nothing else, they could update the guidance to recognise that the guidance is very focused on people who are in financial poverty. And that's important, but there's no recognition in it that some people are not financially poor, they're relationship poor. They've got the money for their funeral, but they haven't got the people. And the guidance could very easily be updated to recognise that, and to recognise how many more of us there are now than there used to be.
Thank you, Penny. It's that more inclusive kind of model of what ageing looks like, and don't just assume. It happens in medical care, I think, as well. We've done an episode a while ago with Gail Miller in America, but talking about how there's just this kind of block around language in medicine, in dying, in so many areas where it's just not inclusive to us. And I still can't quite believe there's no central register of wills. I find that utterly astounding.
There is something called the National Will Register, which is a private sector initiative endorsed by the Law Society, but
it's voluntary.
It's voluntary. My current will is sitting in my filing cabinet. If no one looks through my filing cabinet, they'll never find it. And the other thing is that you can register your will voluntarily with the Courts and Probate Service. But then someone needs to know to go looking for it and to actually do that. But yes, it's completely crazy that there's not a system. And also the other thing is a will is a private document. So the only person who has right of access to it before probate, or at all if probate doesn't exist, is your executor. I think that's right, Charlotte, isn't it?
Well, so whilst you're alive, it's your own private document, and then yes, on death, the executor has access to it.
But for example, the local authority doesn't, which is crazy.
It's just madness, isn't it? Charlotte, what would you like to see change? What would make your life easier?
Again, it's greater communication, and I think from my side, perhaps people not being afraid to come and have a conversation with us. But I'm all about communication, and getting as much information out there as possible. And as you say, we need to be less afraid of talking about and losing mental capacity. And, whether it's these conversations, it might be leaflets, podcasts, whatever it might be. But there are a lot of people out there who, would still like the information, in paper format, because they don't have access to computers in the way that a lot of us do. So it's that same, theme, really: communication, information, and keeping the conversation going.
Fantastic. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. I think that's absolutely right, isn't it? It's talking about it and making, and to quote, when I went to something at Story House, we Stella Duffy talked about talk more about death, and people, I think, were a bit, oh, we need to talk more about death. I think it's really, really important. And I hope that this podcast has been helpful to our audience. And I know it's been very helpful to our audience who are with us today and to our listeners as well. There's been an awful lot of people who have been saying, yeah, this actually really matters too. And so, yeah, thank you very much for joining us today on The Full Stop.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been an interesting discussion, and it feels like we've only just scratched the surface, to be quite honest. Wow, that was a heavy episode. And thanks for listening, and we hope you're doing okay after that. And we know this is a difficult topic, but we'd love to hear from you if you have any feedback. Be it a comment on a social media post or an email to us. And you can find our contact details on our website, www.thefullstoppod.com. And if you want to support what we do, you can find ways to do that there too. But the best way would be to join our online community, where you can both support our work, but also become part of what others are calling one of the best online spaces for support and community. And whilst over there, you can also sign up for our email newsletter, check out show notes and our resources. And as always, it's important for us to let you know you are not alone.
Oh gosh, hasn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so much more, and I think, yeah, just that record keeping and telling people where your stuff is, but then who to tell. It's one question sort of leads to another question to another question,